Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video we're going to be talking about some kind of out of nowhere NBA players that almost signed some huge contracts throughout their career. Now there's a couple of different ways in which this happens. Some of the players on this list, you're going to be sitting there thinking, how in the world did this guy earn a contract offer to this extent? And then how did he even turn it down? And then other players are actually good and just made some bad decisions, whether that was their own or based on advice from their agents. A lot of these guys just bet on themselves going into a particular free agency class and turned down an extension that in hindsight, they definitely should have taken. Now, first up on the list is going to be Nerlens Noel, currently of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And this is a player that in his first couple of seasons in Philadelphia was really productive, specifically on the defensive end. He was the 6th pick in the 2013 draft and was kind of part of what initially jump-started the process for Philadelphia, and going into that draft, had Noel not hurt his knee during the college season, he probably would have been the first overall pick in that draft. So when the Sixers decided to look into trading him in 2017 to clear up their front court logjam because they had so many other good bigs on the roster, there were a lot of interested teams. The team that ultimately ended up trading for Noel was the Dallas Mavericks, even though they knew that he was going to be a restricted free agent after that season. During contract negotiations, the Mavs offered him a 4-year, $70 million extension that Noel ended up turning down. Then the Mavs pulled the offer off the table and Noel signed a 1-year qualifying offer worth around $4 million. Signing that qualifying offer allowed Noel to become an unrestricted free agent the following offseason, and ultimately he just never found the big deal that he was seeking after he countered the Mavs' initial offer, 4 years, $70 million, asking for a max contract from the Mavericks, and that certainly never came. And now he's just been signing minimum deals around the league ever since. And this is a huge loss of value and monetary loss for a player Noel that certainly was good and had potential early in his career, but should have just taken the money at the time and ended up losing out on a huge contract as a result. Moving on now to number 2, we're going to talk about a player that isn't actually in the league anymore, and that is Vladimir Radmanovic. He was the 12th pick in the 2001 draft and was an important piece off the bench for the, at the time, Seattle Supersonics, and was looking for a new contract going into the summer of 2005. At the time, the team offered him a 6-year deal worth $42 million, but he decided to decline it and sign a 1-year deal instead, and I think you can start to see a pattern already in this video. About halfway through the following season, Radmanovic was upset that he was still coming off the bench. He wanted to be a starter. He told the team that, and they responded by trading him away to the Clippers, and then the following offseason, he ended up signing a new deal with the Lakers. And unfortunately for him, he just never reached the same statistical numbers throughout the rest of his career, and definitely should have taken that initial contract as he bounced around the league as a role player, signing shorter deals for the rest of his career, and as I said, passing up on what was initially a over $40 million contract, and this is back in 2005. $40 million in the NBA in 2005 is a lot different than $40 million in 2019 in the NBA. Regardless, it's still a lot of money to be giving up that he almost could have had. Moving on now to number 3, and this is the big one, and I haven't even made the thumbnail at this point in this video, but I know that he's going to be in it, and it's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, currently of the LA Lakers. Now, even though nowadays KCP is pretty much just seen as a gigantic meme and a kind of effective basketball player that just makes really questionable decisions on the court, going into 2017 free agency, he was seen as a high-value two-way guard in that free agency class. After being a first-round pick for the Pistons and having a solid first few seasons of his career, he went into the summer of 2017 as a relatively highly sought-after free agent after posting 12 points on respectable three-point shooting numbers the season before. And he entered free agency at just 24 years old, and so there were a lot of teams that were legitimately interested in him, and there was even talk that he could potentially receive a max contract offer from teams like the Nets that at the time were throwing max offers at any restricted free agents just to try and get their incumbent teams to spend big money to open up more space for them. Now, although that max contract offer never came about for KCP, before the 16-17 season even started, the Pistons did offer him a 4-year deal worth $80 million that he ultimately ended up declining. Now, in the end, things just never really caught on for him in free agency, at least initially, though he did end up signing a 1-year, $18 million deal with the Lakers after some of the other big names were taken off the market. So at first, it didn't seem like that big of a deal that he passed up on the 4-year $80 million deal because he signed the 1-year $18. He thought he was going to have a really good year with the Lakers and then cash in on free agency the following year, and as we all know, that just never happened. He has since gone on to stay with the Lakers by signing subsequently cheaper 1-year deals year after year, and assuming he opts into his player option for next season, he will have earned around $47 million in that same 4-year time span of that initial contract extension that was offered by the Pistons, which is still a good amount of money, but obviously he's missing out on like $33 million that he could have had if he had just taken that initial deal. Now, this situation is a little bit different than some of the other ones that we're going to talk about in this video because it's not like KCP was being delusional. Teams were legitimately interested in him, and a lot of people thought he was worth a lot of money, and signing that 1-year deal at the time seemed like a legitimate option. The problem is he's kind of been exposed a little bit in LA. He hasn't been truly awful. It's more about his reputation just being a really bad player at this point. He just hasn't been able to knock down shots, which is what he needs to do in LA to be valuable. The value of three-point shooting has never been higher than it is right now, and he's just not a good enough shooter to demand that kind of money, even though initially the premise made sense. So even though these other players, you could really blame their agency teams in terms of why did they lose out on all this money, it was a smart move at the time. It seemed it just didn't end up working out for KCP, though he's still making, $47 million over 4 years, so I'm not feeling bad for him at all. Moving on now, let's talk about another former player, and this one is Joe Smith, who was the first overall pick back in the 1995 NBA draft. Smith played his first few seasons with the Warriors and got off to a really good start, even averaging almost 19-9 in just his second season, to which the Warriors responded by offering him a contract extension worth over $80 million. And again, keep in mind, this is in the late 90s, $80 million. But for whatever reason, Smith declined the extension and then let the team know that he wanted to play on the East Coast rather than the West Coast, and so they traded him away to the Philadelphia 76ers during the 97-98 season. His stats did go down a little bit with the Sixers, but was still a highly sought-after free agent in the summer of 1998, and he ended up signing with the Minnesota Timberwolves for a little bit over $1 million, which at the time was really strange. How did this guy that everybody wants, that turned down an $80 million contract with the Warriors, sign a over $1 million deal with the Timberwolves of all teams? And it was part of this really weird scheme by the Timberwolves to basically just completely circumvent the salary cap, where they bring in Smith on a couple of cheap 1-year deals, and then they get his bird rights and they go over the cap by signing him to a huge contract. That was the plan, but it never really worked out for him or for the team. Now, I'm not going to go too much more into detail of that specific situation because I think that's something that I might end up doing a video on down the road. If that's something that you would like to see, then leave a like, leave a comment down below to let me know. But for Smith specifically, after that, things just kind of went downhill in his career, and he ended up with one of the biggest journeyman careers of any player in NBA history, playing for 13 different franchises across 16 seasons, but never making an All-Star or an All-NBA team, even after what was such a promising start to his career, and as I said earlier, turning down an $80 million contract. And the most that Smith ever made in any 1 year in his NBA career was just under $7 million in the 06-07 season with the 76ers. So he definitely missed out on a huge contract. Moving on now, let's talk about Bonzi Wells, who went into the summer of 2006 after a solid season before with the Sacramento Kings as a relatively highly sought after free agent. So sought after, in fact, that the Kings offered the at the time 29-year-old Wells a 5-year $38.5 million contract in advance of free agency that he ended up turning down with the hopes of getting a bigger deal that just never ended up coming for Wells. He ended up signing a 1-year deal with the Houston Rockets worth around $4 to $5 million, and then never really caught on anywhere else around the league and was out of the league just a few seasons later. And ironically, if Wells had taken the initial contract that the Kings had given him, he still would have been in the league. His contract would have gone on for another 3 seasons after he exited the league and no other teams wanted him. So he definitely missed out on a ton of money here, and it's just another example among many on this list of players banking on themselves, saying that they're going to get a better deal, thinking that they're worth more than they are, and then not ending up getting that deal that they're hoping for. And again, whether that's a management team issue, whether that's a team or a player just not being able to agree on a contract, whether that's a player just thinking that they're worth more than they are, a lot of these players are missing out on a ton of money. And last up now, let's talk about Shabazz Muhammad, who was the 14th overall pick in the 2013 NBA draft and was a pretty popular pick simply because he was one of the best high school players in the entire country going into college before spending only one season in college and heading to the NBA. He was a big, strong scoring wing with some shooting issues, but had enough potential, or at least had that kind of reputation, simply because he was so talented at such a young age. He had a solid first couple of seasons and was ultimately offered a 4-year, $40 million contract by the Timberwolves in advance of him ever even being a free agent. However, before the 16-17 season, Muhammad decided to turn down that extension because he thought if he had a strong season, he would be able to get a much bigger deal in the summer of 2017, with the thinking being that all these players got these huge deals in the summer of 2016 as a result of the salary cap spike, and Muhammad would be another one of those players in the summer of 2017. But the way it worked out was pretty much the worst case scenario for Muhammad. All of the teams ended up using all of their money in the summer of 2016, so there wasn't nearly as much salary cap space in the summer of 2017, and then Muhammad didn't even have a very good year on the court for a variety of different reasons, and ultimately ended up signing a minimum contract in the summer of 2017 as well as in 18, and is now out of the league just a couple of years after being offered a 4-year, $40 million contract extension. Now, I will admit that this one is slightly defensible in hindsight because Muhammad was a good young player. He's a player that some teams certainly liked and just never was able to have the kind of season that he hoped that he would. And then the salary cap stuff was working against him as well. So I don't really blame him all that much for turning down this contract. But in the end, it's definitely something where he lost out on a ton of money and is now over NBA career. But there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.